You wake up at 52 or 58 or 63, and you realize something that nobody warns you about. You've stopped wanting. Not just stopped wanting a relationship. Stopped wanting, period. The ache that used to pull at you in the evenings is gone. The restlessness that made you scroll through photos of women half your age is gone. The voice telling you something was missing is finally, mercifully quiet. And in that silence, something unexpected happened. You felt free. But somewhere underneath that freedom, there's a question you don't ask yourself very often. A question you definitely don't ask out loud. Is this freedom? Or is this the most elaborate prison you've ever built? That question is the reason you're here, even if you don't know it yet. Most people will tell you a man stays single after 50 because he's afraid. He's broken. He's settling. But that's not the story you're living. You're not settling. You're actually happy. Or at least you've gotten good enough at calling it happiness that the difference doesn't matter anymore. The real question isn't why you're alone. It's something much harder. It's whether being alone is actually who you are, or whether it's what happened to you after you decided you couldn't risk being hurt again. There's a difference, and you've probably always known there was a difference. By the time these next 15 minutes are over, you'll know exactly what I mean. At some point, the search just stopped. You don't remember making a decision about it. You didn't write a list of reasons or have a moment of clarity where you decided you were done. It just happened. One day you realized you hadn't checked your dating app in 3 weeks, then a month. Then you deleted it, not dramatically, just quietly. A woman started flirting with you at a work event and you felt that old familiar feeling rise in your chest. That ancient hunger. But instead of leaning in, you felt something else. Exhaustion. The bone-deep kind that comes from knowing exactly how this story ends. So you didn't pursue it. You were polite. You said goodnight. You drove home in silence and felt immense relief that you didn't have to hope anymore. You've never told anyone that part, the relief. Because relief doesn't sound noble. It sounds like giving up. So you've probably told yourself a different story. The one about valuing peace. The one about being focused on yourself. The one about how women are too much work. These stories are probably partly true. But there's something underneath them that nobody says out loud. You got tired of performing. Tired of wondering if you were saying the right thing. Tired of noticing her looking at her phone while you were talking. Tired of the whole exhausting equation of trying to matter to someone who might leave. So you built a wall around that need, not all at once, gradually, brick by brick, until the hunger itself became quiet. And you told yourself that meant you'd evolved past it. As you get older, your brain genuinely does reorganize what matters. Time becomes finite. Things that felt urgent suddenly feel optional. You naturally pull back from obligations that don't serve you. That part is real. That part is wisdom. But here's the part nobody wants to admit. This same process can also be fear pretending to be wisdom. You can't tell the difference from the inside. That's the trap. The man who's genuinely thriving alone looks almost identical to the man who's given up but is pretending he's happy. They both say the same things. They both feel the same surface-level peace. The only difference is what's underneath the peace. For some men, underneath is genuine fullness, hobbies that light them up, friendships that matter, a sense of purpose, an actual choice. For other men, underneath the peace is a quietness that runs so deep it's almost like freezing, a numbness they call contentment. Which one are you? Pay attention to that question. The answer matters more than you probably realize. A divorce doesn't just end a marriage. It dismantles something deeper, your sense that the world makes sense, that love is permanent, that you can trust your own judgment. If you've been through it, you know the feeling. It's not sadness exactly. It's closer to standing in a room that's tilting, trying to act like the floor is still level. You made promises you meant to keep. You saw a future so clearly you could feel it. And then one day that entire future vanished. Not because you failed, because the other person changed their mind about everything, about you. That does something to a person. Years later, when you're 55 or 60, when you've rebuilt everything and you're functional again, there's still something that hasn't healed. It's not visible. It doesn't have a name, but it's there. It's the knowledge that the worst thing you could imagine actually happened and you survived it, but barely. Your brain learned a lesson from that experience. The lesson is this: never again. Never again let someone become so essential that losing them could destroy you. Never again be that vulnerable. Never again believe that love is enough to keep someone around. This lesson feels like wisdom. It feels like you've learned something important about how the world actually works. But it's not wisdom. It's a cage you built to protect yourself from the only thing that terrifies you more than pain itself: the possibility of it happening again. Now here's what makes this complicated. You can't just decide to forget the lesson. You can't just tell yourself, that was then, this is now. Your nervous system doesn't work that way. Your body remembers. It remembers exactly how the pain felt, and it will spend the rest of your life finding reasons to keep you away from situations that might create that feeling again. So when someone shows interest in you, something in you tightens. Your mind starts listing reasons why it won't work, why she's not your type, why you're too set in your ways, why relationships are too much work. These thoughts come automatically. You don't have to manufacture them. Your survival instinct is doing you a favor, or so it seems. The trap is this: after 10 years or 20 years of listening to those protective thoughts, you stop recognizing them as protection. You just think they're true. You think you've genuinely become someone who's happier alone. You think you've evolved past the need for connection. But you haven't evolved past it. You've just built walls so carefully that you can't see them anymore. And the truly cruel part, those walls don't just keep pain out. They keep everything else out too. Let me tell you about David, because his story is probably your story too. David was married for 23 years. 23 years of belonging to someone, of someone knowing his habits, his fears, his specific way of laughing. Then she told him it was over. She'd met someone else. That was 18 years ago. He says that now without much emotion, but he remembers the exact way the light came through the kitchen window when she said it. He remembers which chair he was sitting in. He remembers thinking that this was the moment everything he believed about the world was wrong. In the years after, David did everything right: therapy, a successful rebuild, kids still saw him regularly, friends, a comfortable apartment, hobbies. By every metric that matters to everyone else, David won. He survived. He moved on. But David hasn't been on a date in 17 years. And here's the thing nobody talks about. David doesn't think about that fact every day. Sometimes he goes months without it crossing his mind. He's built a genuinely good life. He's not sitting alone in the dark thinking about what he lost. But sometimes he'll see a couple at a restaurant, and the woman will reach across the table and touch the man's hand while he's talking, and David will feel something shift inside his chest. A door opening for just a moment before he remembers to close it. He'll quickly look away. He'll remind himself about his freedom. He'll think about how women are complicated and relationships are work, and he's perfectly happy as he is. And he'll be lying. Not intentionally, but when you've spent 17 years building a story about why you don't want something, you get very good at making the story feel true. Every time a woman shows interest, David finds a reason she's wrong for him. She's too needy. She's too career-focused. She doesn't understand his life. She wants things he can't give. The reasons are infinite because his mind is working overtime to protect him from ever having to feel what he felt the day his wife left. David's built a house. Every wall is there for a reason. Every window is locked. He's told everyone, including himself, that it's the most comfortable house he could possibly live in. But sometimes at 3 in the morning when he can't sleep, David lies there and thinks about what it would be like to unlock just one window, to let someone see inside, to matter to someone again. And then he remembers. And the door closes. The question David never asks himself is whether this peace he's built is actually peace, or whether he's just become very, very skilled at calling his survival strategy peace. Maybe that's a question you've never asked yourself either. But it's the only question that actually matters. At some point in your 50s, independence quit being something you do and became something you are. When you were younger, independence meant something clear. You could pay your bills, you didn't need your parents, you made your own decisions, it felt like freedom. But somewhere along the way it calcified. It became your identity, not just what you value but who you are. The man who doesn't need anyone, the man who thrives alone, the man who made the choice to be solo. Except you're not sure you made that choice. It's more like the choice was made for you, and then you built an entire identity around it so it would feel intentional. Here's how it works. Your nervous system decided that needing someone wasn't safe, so it slowly started filtering your experience of the world. You get invited to dinner and you feel annoyed, not at the friend but at the obligation. You spend Saturday night alone and you feel peace instead of loneliness. You watch your married brother stress about his wife and you feel grateful you don't have that. Your brain is constantly collecting evidence that you made the right choice, that being alone is actually who you are, that you're happier this way. And the terrifying part, the evidence is real. You've built a life that feels better alone because you've carefully constructed it so that being alone causes the least friction. It feels like proof, like destiny, like this is just who you turned out to be. But there's something your brain doesn't show you. It doesn't show you the Saturday nights when the peace feels a little too quiet. It doesn't show you the moment when you see a couple laugh at something only they understand, and your chest tightens in a way you quickly look away from. It doesn't show you the voice in the back of your mind wondering if you're really happy or if you've just gotten really good at not admitting you're lonely. That voice is the crack in the narrative. And you probably spend a lot of energy keeping it quiet. Here's what's dangerous about building an identity around solitude. Once you've told yourself you're someone who thrives alone, any evidence to the contrary feels like a betrayal of yourself. So when you feel lonely, you don't admit it. You reinterpret it. You call it solitude. You call it peace. You call it exactly what you need your life to be. Your mind isn't lying to you. It's protecting you. It's trying to keep your internal world consistent. It's trying to make sure the story about who you are never cracks. But here's what happens when you do this for long enough. The line between what you genuinely want and what you've convinced yourself you want becomes invisible. You wake up at 60 and you realize you can't remember the last time you felt truly happy. Not peaceful, happy. The kind of happiness that comes from being known by another person, from mattering in that specific way. But you've spent so long telling yourself you don't want that anymore that you don't know how to admit you do. The trap isn't that you're alone. The trap is that you've built an entire identity to justify being alone, and now that identity is your prison. Let me ask you something, and sit with it before you answer. If you could have someone to call at 2 in the morning when you can't sleep, someone who would listen and understand and not try to fix it, would you want that? If you could have someone who knows exactly how you take your coffee and makes it without asking, would you want that? If you could have someone to share the small observations with, the funny thing you saw, the weird feeling you had, the small victories nobody else would understand, would you want that? Of course you would. Everyone would. But here's the question nobody asks, because the answer is terrifying. Would you be willing to risk that she might leave? That's where the whole equation changes. Because having someone means losing that autonomy you fought so hard to protect. It means being dependent on another person's moods and choices. It means being vulnerable to the exact pain you've spent decades learning how to avoid. Your nervous system does the math and it comes up simple. The pain of loss is bigger than the pleasure of having, so the rational choice is no connection. And your rational mind agrees. This makes sense. This is smart. This is you finally protecting yourself the way you should have all along. But here's what your nervous system doesn't tell you. You're not wired for no connection. You're wired for it. Humans literally evolved to feel safe in groups, to belong to another person, to be known. When you override that, when you build a life without connection, something underneath keeps searching for it anyway. That's why the successful men who claim to be completely content alone sometimes have obsessive hobbies that take up hours of their week. Why they sometimes pour endless energy into work that will never matter as much as mattering to one other person. Why they sometimes find themselves in fantasy scenarios where they imagine a different version of their life, a version where they were brave enough to risk it. You can suppress that need. You can work around it. You can convince yourself it doesn't exist. But you can't eliminate it. That's not how humans are built. So what you've actually done is not chosen solitude. You've chosen a specific kind of loneliness that feels like freedom because you call it independence. And the cruelest part is this. If someone came into your life tomorrow who was genuinely good and genuinely interested, you probably couldn't let them in. Not because you don't want to, because your walls are so strong now that you don't know how to open them anymore. You've locked the doors so many times that you've lost the key. The only question left is whether you're okay with that, whether you're truly fine with never again being known the way a partner would know you. And if you're not fine with it, what are you going to do about that? There are two kinds of single men over 50. The first kind has genuinely evolved. He's done the work. He's felt all the hard feelings and sat with them long enough that they've lost their sharp edges. He's rebuilt his sense of self not around being alone, but around being fully, unapologetically himself. His friendships are deep. His solitude is full. He doesn't need a relationship to feel complete, and he's at peace with that. If someone extraordinary came into his life, he might open that door, or he might not. Either way, he'd feel like he was choosing. The second kind is also at peace, but it's a different kind of peace. It's the peace of someone who stopped fighting a long time ago. It's the peace of surrender disguised as acceptance. He tells himself he doesn't want a relationship, and he's probably even convinced himself it's true. But if you sit very still in his presence, if you really listen, you might hear something underneath the peace. You might hear exhaustion. The man who's genuinely thriving alone has flexibility. If his circumstances change, if his needs shift, he can shift with them. His walls came down intentionally. He can open them again if he chooses. The man who's trapped has no flexibility. He's told himself a story for so long that he can't imagine the ending being different. His walls didn't come down because they were never meant to. They're permanent fixtures now. So the question isn't whether you're thriving alone. The real question is whether you're choosing your aloneness or whether your aloneness is choosing you. Here's how to know. If someone came into your life tomorrow who was genuinely good and genuinely interested, where would your mind go? Would you start scanning for reasons it won't work? For all the ways she's incompatible or complicated or more trouble than she's worth? Would those reasons feel like truth? Would the risk feel impossible? If yes, then your nervous system is in control. You're trapped. If you could feel the fear and still imagine saying yes, then you're genuinely free. One more way to know. Think about the rest of your life without another person in it. Close your eyes. Really imagine it. Does it feel like relief? Like you dodged a bullet and now you get to live in peace? Or does it feel like resignation? Like this is just what happened and you've made your peace with it? Relief is wisdom. You're making an active choice every day. Resignation is a wound. You're living with the consequence of a choice your survival instincts made for you years ago. The difference is small but absolute. It changes everything about what your solitude actually means. Pay attention to which one you're feeling, because the answer matters more than you've probably ever admitted to yourself. By now, you've recognized yourself somewhere in this story. Maybe in David, maybe in the walls, maybe in the exhausting work of building a narrative that keeps you safe. Maybe in the moment when you saw a couple touch hands and felt something you quickly pushed down. You know who you are in this. And there's something I need to tell you before you leave this. The loneliness you've been protecting yourself from with all those walls and all those reasons and all that careful construction of independence, it's still there. It's underneath everything. You haven't escaped it. You've just learned to live with it in a way that doesn't hurt as much as admitting it would. That's not peace, that's frostbite. Your fingers go numb when they're too cold. You don't feel the damage while it's happening. You only feel it later when sensation returns. And by then, some of the feeling is gone forever. The danger is this. You can spend the next 10 or 15 or 20 years in that numbness and it will feel fine. It will feel like contentment, like you made a wise choice, like you're better off than all those people stuck in complicated relationships. But then one day, and you'll know exactly which day it is, you'll wake up and realize you're getting old, and you'll have never again felt what it felt like to matter to someone in that specific way, to be known completely, to have someone worry about you the way you worried about them. You'll realize you chose safety over almost everything. And it will be too late to unmake that choice. This isn't meant to shame you, it's meant to wake you up. Because the truth is this, you're not really afraid of being hurt again. You're afraid of knowing that you were wrong, that the walls you built were unnecessary, that you could have risked it, that you could have been brave and you chose not to. The story you've told yourself about being happier alone, it's a very good story. You've had years to perfect it, but deep down where you don't let anyone look, you know it's not the whole truth. You know the difference between peace and the absence of pain. And they're not the same thing. So here's what I want you to sit with after this video ends. Not a solution, not advice, just a question that you probably won't answer, but that will follow you anyway. In 20 years, when you look back on this part of your life, will you be relieved that you stayed safe? Or will you finally admit what you already know? That you were always brave enough for love. You were just afraid enough to convince yourself you weren't. That's the real tragedy, not that you're alone, but that you chose to be. When you finally understand the difference between those two things, everything changes. Or maybe nothing changes. Maybe you keep living exactly the way you are. But at least you'll know you made that choice while you were still awake. If this story resonated with you, don't just move on to the next video. Take a moment and ask yourself the question we explored today. Have I chosen this life consciously, or has fear quietly been choosing it for me? If you're comfortable sharing, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Do you believe staying single after 50 has brought you peace, or has it become a way of protecting yourself from being hurt again? There's no right or wrong answer, just honest reflection. And if you enjoy thoughtful conversations about psychology, relationships, and the hidden patterns that shape our lives, consider subscribing. Every week, we explore the parts of human behavior that most people feel but rarely put into words. Until next time, take care of yourself and stay curious about your own mind.